Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk from the Temple Institute in Jerusalem, Israel. Rabbi Chaim and Richman here together with Yitzchak Reuven. Today is the 19th day of the month of Sivan, 5777, the 13th of June, 2017. This week's Torah portion is the Parashat of Shelach Lecha. Send for yourself spies to spy out the land of Israel, beginning in the book of Numbers, chapter 13. And this is also the Shabbat of Shabbat Mevarchim, the Sabbath of the blessing of the new moon of the month of Tammuz, which will occur following Sunday, June 25th. Well, this is it. Every year when we reach Parashat Shelach, we hit the wall, in a manner of speaking. It is a cacophony for us of, pronounce that correctly, Yitzchak?
Cacophony.
Whatever. So it happens when you read a lot but you don't talk to anybody. It's a cacophony of emotions and a lot of turmoil, a lot of mental turmoil is what Parashat Shelach is all about, because it is the single most excruciatingly influential point in the timeline of the people of Israel on their journey towards the land of Israel. It is the watershed event that changed everything, not only for that generation but for all time. It is the incident of the spies. In a generation that we've already spoken about, the generation of the desert that was so high, so holy, so pious, so much in love with Hashem, so much the object of his love, the ones that heard his voice at Mount Sinai, the ones that perceived his essence, the ones that ate the manna that required such integrity, the ones who received the Torah, and now this generation whom he took out of Egypt with great signs and wonders, outstretched hand, and all the miracles, he's about to take them into the land of Israel. You know, they've been annoying. They've had their moments. Listen, they've had their moments of obstinacy, of difficulty. Don't forget that they were involved with the golden calf. How much of it was the idea of the Jews and how much it was the mixed multitude is another issue. But they've been through, there's a lot of water under this bridge here. And God has dealt with it all very graciously. He forgave them the sin of the golden calf, which was quite an insult to his honor. But now, everything changes, and it changes for all time. Because now what happens is, and don't forget, last week we had the complainers about the meat, the complainers about the complaining, that they wanted to complain. We had Miriam speaking Lashon Hara about her brother. We've had a lot of things going on here that have been manifest and demonstrative of the very, very dramatic and extreme dynamic of the personality of this generation. But now what happens is, Hashem told Moshe that he has Hashem's permission to initiate his own idea, his idea that he had, which was to spend, because Shelach Lecha, send for yourself. I didn't tell you to do it. Hashem said, you want to send spies out? To spy out the land of Canaan that I give to the children of Israel. One man from each of his father's tribes shall you send, everyone a leader among them. So Moshe sends out these 12 men.
I have to interrupt, Rabbi. You said it was Moshe's idea, because God said, send for yourself. But Moshe, when we get to the book of Deuteronomy, he vehemently denies that it was his idea. He basically says to Israel, it was your idea,
yes,
and you dragged me into it.
Thank you for that clarification. Well put, and I appreciate that so much. What I really meant to say was that it wasn't Hashem's idea. Okay. Basically, Hashem is saying,
it's a hot potato. Nobody really wants to own it.
Shelach Lecha, you send for yourself if that's what you want to do. But no, you're right. It wasn't Moshe's idea either. They instigated it, and so he asked to be able to do it.
It's interesting, because just last Parsha, people came to Moshe and said, we want to do the Passover offering, but we couldn't, and their intention was so pure, and was also their initiative, and God loved the idea.
Yes, but I see no comparison whatsoever, because when it came to the second Passover, it was a group of pious men that, through no fault of their own, could not bring the Passover in time, and they wanted to do Hashem's will. Here, Hashem had already told them what His will is. His will is that they should go into the land.
And they were kind of...
So He chooses these men. And
looking for loopholes?
And the verse says... The verse says about these princes, Kulam anashim, they were all men. Rashi b'nei Yisrael hema. They were the heads of the children of Israel, and these words are laden with tremendous significance, as we know every word in the Hebrew original of Torah is. So, kulam anashim, they were all men, means that they were all tzaddikim. They were all righteous at that time. So he takes these men, and they weren't schleppers. You know what I'm saying? They weren't like. They didn't work on the waterfront docks, you know what I'm saying? These were, nothing personal for those of our listeners who, or did I just say exactly the wrong thing? For those of you who work on the waterfront docks, there's nothing wrong with that. Perfectly legitimate and respectable profession. What I mean to say is, help me out here.
What did you mean to say?
These men were spiritual giants, okay? If you work on a waterfront dock and you're a spiritual giant, this applies to you too. And of course, amongst them were Yehoshua ben Nun and Kalev ben Yefuneh, who were of a different stripe, a different color altogether. Anyway, but what happened was they go out, and they are the greatest of the great. He sends them to see what's going on. What's going on there?
He sends them with a list.
How is it? Is it? And the people that are there, are they strong or are they weak? Are they few or numerous? And how is the land in which it dwells? Is it good or is it bad? How are the cities in which it dwells? Are they open or are they fortified? And how is the land? Is it fertile? Is it lean? Are there trees or not? So all of these things can be interpreted on spiritual levels as well. It's not that Moshe was doubting the beauty or the greatness of the land of Israel. So they go out, and the fact is they saw some things that were going on there, according to our sages. They saw some things that were going on that they misunderstood. They misunderstood that Hashem was creating some distractions so that the people of the land would not be preoccupied with them and see them. And they misinterpreted everything, and they came back, make a long story short, and they gave a terrible, evil, depressing report about the land of Israel. And they spoke terrible slander about the land of Israel itself. Last week we had a case of slander, that Miriam was slandering Moshe. Well, here's slander against the land of Israel, Lashon Hara.
They said a lot of good things about the land. They brought back the beautiful fruits. It was only when they said that the land eats its inhabitants, I think, is when it turned into something bad.
They talked about that the cities were fortified and very great, and that there were the offspring of giants there, and Amalek was there, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and Kalev. He saw where this was going. So he silenced the people toward Moses, meaning he started to say, yeah, and Moses, and then he said, Moses, don't forget all the wonderful thing that Moses has done for us, and surely, he says, we shall surely ascend and conquer it, for we can surely do it, which of course is the clarion cry today of all those who make aliyah to the land of Israel. But back in verse 31, chapter 13, the men who had ascended with him said, we cannot ascend to that people, for it is too strong for us. And by the way, in the Hebrew of this verse 31, the word has a double entendre in Hebrew. Ki chazak mimenu is translated as here as for they are too strong for us. But the same exact word in Hebrew also can mean ki chazak mimenu, they are too strong for him, stronger than him, meaning that they were saying, the spies, that they're too strong for God. So they brought forth to the children of Israel an evil report on the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have passed to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. All the people that we saw in it were huge. So the Nephilim, the sons of the giants from among the Nephilim. We were like grasshoppers in our eyes, and so were we in their eyes. They looked at us, they saw grasshoppers.
Huge.
So the entire assembly raised up and issued its voice. The people wept that night. And they all murmured against Moshe and Aaron. They said, if only we died in Egypt, if only we died in the wilderness. Why is Hashem bringing us to this land to die by the sword? Our wives and young children will be taken captive. It's better for us to return to Egypt. Make a long story short, this was a terrible national mass hysteria for no reason at all. They cried that night. It was the first Tisha B'Av. It was the very first 9th of Av in history. That's what day it was. And the people gave up. They gave up their belief in the land of Israel. They cried. They gave up their connection with Hashem. And because they spoke against the land of Israel, this was a sin that was so grievous. It was far more grievous, heinous, insidious, and invidious than the sin of the golden calf, because Hashem could not handle this. He wouldn't. He killed these men in a plague that spoke against the land. The rest he forgave, meaning that they're going to have a portion in the world to come. But he made a decree that all these people of this generation will die here in the wilderness. And only the children about whom they said, oy vey, oy, our children are going to die. No, those will go in. And of course the women also went in. It was a generation that had more women in it that came into the land of Israel ultimately with Joshua than men, because a lot of old grandmas, because the women refused to accept this slander. They didn't listen to it. Stopped up their ears. They said, no, we refuse to believe you. But this was the decree against the generation of the spies. And ever since, this has been a recurring theme, or should I say recurring nightmare, in the annals of Jewish history. This kind of treachery, this kind of betrayal of the land of Israel. It's a sin that was not forgivable, when even though Hashem forgave the sin against himself, as it were, of idolatry, of the golden calf, he couldn't forgive the sin of speaking against the land of Israel, because the land of Israel then and now is tantamount, is synonymous with the honor of Hashem in this world. So, that's what we know. That's what we know about this, and that's in a very, very nutshell version, because there are levels upon levels of meaning. What was their motivation? What happened to them? There's a whole school of thought that that they were overcome with obviously they were overcome with some sort of mental aberration, some sort of weakness. They freaked out. They had some sort of a terrible crisis of faith. Some interpret that this had to do with their own honor and glory, that they didn't want to give up their positions of influence, that they were afraid that when they would go into the land, who's going to be the chief rabbi? Who's going to be in charge here? Some look at it as being motivated by very small kind of hubris type of human failing, while others see this in a completely different light, and they interpret it as a terrible flaw in faith, but ultimately they interpret it as being a mistake that they made in understanding the true nature of their relationship with God, and in the true nature of what it means to go into Eretz Israel, into the land of Israel, and that they meant well, because they thought that they were so close to Hashem being in the desert, and that they could never be that close again if they would have to go into the land of Israel. But the point is this. The point is, whatever the cause of it was the first Tisha B'Av, and it's because of that, ultimately, that every catastrophe that ever befell Israel was born at that moment. There are those who will say that every catastrophe was born with the destruction of the temple. That's true, but the root, the soul, as it were, of the destruction of the temple is back here on this day of this crisis of faith, of this speaking against Moshe, of this snap in mental, cognitive continuum of being able to just all of a sudden doubt Hashem and to speak so terribly against the land of Israel. And as we all know too well, speaking against the land of Israel is all too much the fashion, too much the rage these days. It's the universal malady. It's everywhere. It's without, and sadly, it's within. Speaking against the land of Israel. And as we always mention here on this program, in the context of the what I call the ambivalence of Israeli leadership after 50 years of liberation of Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem, and yet the temple is still only a dream. Well, this has to do with the fact that we don't seem to be convinced as a people of the righteousness of our own cause. Well, that's certainly what's going on here. That's certainly what's going on here, and that is the root of everything. So I'll give you an example of how I would translate this into real terms right now. You know, for 50 years, there's been a number of canards. Is that how you pronounce that word?
Yeah.
I did it right this time.
Yeah.
Of these mental kind of gymnastical golden calves that are like politically correct in the 50 years of the liberation, which is called the occupation. And one of the things that is parroted over and over again is the whole idea of land for peace. Land for peace is the secret of everything. It's the solution of everything. If only Israel will be willing to give up the land that she's been occupying, then there'll be peace in the region and peace in the whole world. This is what we're constantly being told. It's an idea. It's basically dominated the diplomatic efforts to reach to reach what they call a resolve of what they call the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And what that's really all about is about occupation, I'll admit. But what it's really about is about the occupation of our minds. That's really what it's all about, because the reality that was created, that was renewed when Israel liberated the land of Israel, is actually what it was all supposed to be all along. And the most destructive thing of all of this is the self-destructive tendency that we have to subscribe to what the world is feeding us in terms of our own relationship with our own land, and that is that our minds are being occupied. You understand? This is mental slavery, and we can't, and only ourselves can free our minds, and that's just such a vivid example of Parashat Shelach in action. Of speaking against the land of Israel, of the tikkun, the rectification that must be done especially during this time of year, but all the time, is to fix the slander against the land of Israel. Sorry, Yitzchak, I've been going on and on.
Yeah. So. You mentioned earlier the golden calf. And the golden calf, the people, they erred very severely, but they wanted a golden calf as they perceived it, in order that they could continue on their journey. They could continue to the land. They could continue to fulfill their destiny. And here, they're want to absolve themselves of that. They say, we want to stay where we are. We don't want to move forward. There's no such thing in God's world as staying where you are and not moving forward. It's unacceptable. It can't be. And as soon as you opt for that, you're opting out of God's world. And what will come will come. I think for that reason it wasn't yes, mimenu, that the inhabitants are more powerful than us and more powerful than God. They lost faith in themselves. They lost faith, like you said before, in their own and the righteousness of their path. Again, a problem that we struggle with today. And, people who today dream about, before the 6-Day War, it was so beautiful here, they are fantasizing just as those people who fantasized in the desert about the wonderful meals they had in Egypt. You can't go back. It wasn't like that. It never was like that. You're just in panic mode. And are grasping at straws. That's what's happening here, and if there's anything good that comes out of this incident in the desert, it's that, it's almost like an inoculation that we can recognize today when we see that this is occurring again, that we won't get swept up and sucked into it like they were.
And that's the truth of it. As sad as it is, and as excruciatingly painful as it is to study this Torah portion, we realize that it is so timely. We go over and over. We talk about how this is the story of our lives, how we are the living Torah, how we are that generation. And whatever we're reading about in the Torah that week, it's because it's a message for us. And there's nothing as searingly, real as this challenge that we have to embrace the land of Israel, to show our utter, desire and pleasure in the land of Israel, to love the land of Israel, and to fix this terrible nightmare that we're in here. That's what this is really all about. And we look around today, and again, not only is the slander against the land of Israel coming from external sources, but unfortunately, there's enough of it also coming from within the divided house of Israel, and this is the whole problem here. It is a total disconnect from our relationship with God, because you know what? Pardon me, but I'll tell you the honest truth. The relationship with the land of Israel is our relationship with God. It's the same characteristic, it's the same aspect, and the psalmist makes it very clear that God seeks out the welfare of the land of Israel, because that is the footstool of His honor. And so to cherish the land of Israel and not to be ashamed of that, and to do that unabashedly, is to show that we cherish our relationship with the God of Israel. So this is what's got to change, and this is happily what is changing so drastically in our generation. And it's up to us really to make this tikkun of the spies, and to see and hear and speak only beautiful, beautiful things about the land of Israel, which is the truth, and to fight against this terrible tide of slander. Because the truth is that slander against the land of Israel is slander against the God of Israel. Stay with us. Temple Talk will be right back.
Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven with Rabbi Chaim Richman here in Jerusalem, Israel. Today is the 19th day of the month of Sivan, 5777, 13th of June, 2017. This coming Shabbat, Parashat Shelach, Shelach Lecha, send the spies. And it's also, as the Rabbi mentioned, Shabbat Mavarchin, because the following Shabbat and Sunday are Rosh Chodesh, the new month of Tammuz. It's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh beginning on Shabbat and following through on Yom Rishon, Sunday of that week. We've been talking about the spies. And, one other way in which it correlates so closely to today's reality, Rabbi, is that of the 12 spies, 2 spies did not succumb to the weakness, to the breakdown, to the cosmic collapse of faith in themselves or in God or in their destiny or in the purpose of creation. And they were Kalev ben Yefuneh and Yoshua ben Nun. And Kalev, of course, was of the tribe of Judah, and Yoshua of the tribe of Ephraim. Ironically or not ironically, what some people refer to today as the territory, some people refer to as the West Bank, but we refer to as Judea and Samaria, were the inheritances of those 2 tribes, Yehuda and of Ephraim and also of Binyamin. So the same two players who are championing today the cause of the land of Israel are those same two players who back then, the two of the 12 spies who did not perish in the plague but lived, the only two from that generation of the menfolk who lived to enter into the land. And of course, Yoshua led the people into the conquering the land, and Yehuda was rewarded with Caleb was rewarded with the inheritance of Yehuda, and of course the city of Hebron. So yeah, it's not just it's not even just a metaphor. It's the reality. It's the reality today. But the response and the antidote to all this breakdown and self-doubt and questioning the righteousness of our path and the righteousness of our God, that the Torah prescribes in the very same portion of Shelach. I think that I can say that the Temple Institute also prescribes, and as do many other people, and that is immediately after. And I don't know if the story of the spies is even concluded, but it's like the Torah's had enough of it, and it goes right into, here's what you're going to do when you're in the land of Israel. These are the offerings that you're going to bring for the different festivals, and it goes into a description once again of all the libations and the offerings, and as if to say, in spite of all this, you will make it into the land of Israel. In spite of all this, there will be a holy temple, there will be offerings, and this is our destiny as a people, and that's not going to change. That is the same. So yes, God is thoroughly disgusted, as it were, with this generation and with those who subscribe to this type of self-destruction. But the show goes on, and that won't change.
So speaking of self-destruction, which is, I guess, at the core of the whole Shalach Lecha experience, because they basically did not rise to the moment of their crisis. They did not stand in that test, right?
Right.
It's a very parallel theme to the whole idea of the month of Tammuz, which I'll just speak about for a moment, because Rosh Chodesh is already this coming Shabbat. Next Shabbat. I'm sorry. This Shabbat is the Mevarchim, the blessing for Rosh Chodesh. I actually won't be with you next week. Yitzchak, Reuven is going to be going solo for the next 2 or is it 3 weeks of Temple Talk.
I don't want to scare people away, Rabbi.
Oh, you do such a wonderful job.
Nobody wants to hear me.
I will be in Abilene, Texas, on speaking on Wednesday, the 21st of June. Details available on the Temple Institute's website and Facebook page. And I'll be speaking in Lubbock, Texas, on the 25th day of the month of June, which is actually Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. And Yitzchak will be doing Temple Talk. And so I wanted to just mention something about the month of Tammuz, the upcoming month of Tammuz, which we've spoken about a great deal in past years. And we will continue during the month, but I just want to dwell for a moment on the mysterious name of the month, which of course is an idol, is a foreign idol, and it's a god, the god of Tammuz, major Mesopotamian deity. And
say that again.
Major Mesopotamian deity.
Like that.
And although it's true that the names of all the months are from the Babylonian exile, it's strange that the sages acquiesced or confirmed that the name of the month, as it should be known amongst the people of Israel, is for a pagan god. What's the message there? This is the very month in which the process that brought about the destruction of the Holy Temple began, because on the 17th day of the month of Tammuz, the walls of the city of Jerusalem were breached, and ultimately the temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av. So there is a message in the very fact that, and it's staring at us by the very fact that we have this reminder in that the name of the month is Tammuz. And we have this verse, very, very, very amazing, somewhat inexplicable, I think. You have to do a lot of research to learn about what this verse is talking about. And the verse is in the book of Ezekiel in chapter 8. In a chapter which is featuring visions that the prophet has shown of various forms of idolatry that were perpetrated in the Holy Temple, various cults. There's a verse here, verse 14. It says, Ezekiel speaks, he says, "He then brought me to the entrance of the gate of the temple of Hashem, that is to the north, and behold, there were women crying, and behold, there were women sitting, causing Tammuz to cry." There were these women, "V'hine sham nashim, hanashim, yoshvot, mivakot et hatamuz."
Mm-hmm.
They were mivakeh the Tammuz. They were causing the Tammuz to cry. So what is this all about? According to Rashi, the Tammuz was an idol. It had like empty eye sockets into which was placed molten lead that was ignited, and it created this illusion that its face was streaming with tears. That's a simpler interpretation. Rashi's explanation of the Tammuz, the idea of mavakot at the Tammuz, was that they actually did this pyrotechnical act to make the Tammuz idol cry. But the Rambam goes into it much deeper. And the Rambam refers to ancient pagan rites that are mentioned in a number of very ancient sources. I actually researched, he says that the Rambam writes, and he says that he had a lot of ancient books. I checked up a lot of anthropological and mythological sources. And what it is that there was a cult of tragedy. And basically there was actually a matinee that was actually performed near the gate of the temple that was a real tearjerker. It was actually the forerunner of the Greek tragedy. And it was a story of a god that had to die and go underground, and then this other god went in after him. I think it's about Persephone. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, I'll go with that.
Dionysus, Persephone. And it has this whole motif in pagan mindset of winter, and the freeze and death and hibernation and then the renewal of spring. It's a whole thing. But the point is, it was very, very melodramatic, and it was a tragedy, and people would cry, and that was part of the whole idolatrous service, was to enter into the state of this, what I would call this euphoric melancholy. This euphoric melancholy, what it really is in modern psychological terms, it's this nostalgia that people get this obsession with, like you were talking about, like, oh, it was so great before the 6-Day War. It's like this selective memory, or this romanticization,
which enables you to move backwards and not forward.
It's not only being stuck in the past, it's romanticizing pain.
Yeah.
And that is the success of nostalgia and of the whole obsession the person has with the way things were, with yesteryear, and with the motif of tragedy, the sweetness of pain, because it's familiar, because it's a place where one is safe, and because in vulnerability, apparently people feel some sort of expression. Some people feel some sort of a justification of their humanity. In the pain, and that is what this whole idea of making Tammuz cry is all about. So what the sages are signaling to us in naming the month Tammuz is that people are stuck in the pain of the tragedy of the destruction, and it's a very stark reminder of this foolish pagan kind of stuck headspace.
Right.
And so if the theme of Tammuz for us is to get out of that and to get up and to and to rebuild, and the children are ready, and to be ready to be rebuilt, and to stop crying, and to stop making Tammuz crying, and want to see the beautiful tears of molten lead on that idol, and want to see the show again. I want to see it again. I'll sit through the movie again because it's a sweet feeling of pain that I'm so familiar with, right? Like, we're so familiar with pain that it's so much easier to mourn than it is to get up and to rebuild. And it's the same thing with Shelach. The first thing that they do when it looks like they might be a little bit of a confrontation is that they give up. Just like there are people who, for 50 years now, that we actually won after being attacked, and that we actually have what we are supposed to have, they go out of their way and fall all over themselves apologizing for the fact that we're even breathing. And this is all one theme. It's all one theme, and it's time to talk about it, because we're coming into that heady time of Tammuz and Av, that time of which, unfortunately, for so many people, is all about commemorating destruction and all about observing, the cycle of mourning, and not enough about getting out of that cycle of mourning and destruction. And I see all of that as being capsulized and foreshadowed by the sin of the spies. And in fact, it was, because the sin of the spies is what caused the destruction of the temple in the first place. So therefore, in a simple mathematical equation, if I was to write this out on a blackboard, I would say crisis of confidence, lack of faith equals ultimately the destruction of the Holy Temple, because that's what brought it on. It was the lack of confidence in their ability to enter into the land of Israel.
Turning tragedy or helplessness or feeling of helplessness or lack of courage into a sacred cow. This week, Rabbi, I think it's dealing with the same theme. Actually, one sacred cow was slaughtered. I'm referring to an incident on Sunday morning on the Temple Mount. It's the month of Ramadan, and the Arab Muslim presence on the Temple Mount is greater in this month, actually mostly on Fridays. It's not such a change during the rest of the week, during the day, I think in the evening, yes. But anyway, unlike in past recent years, there's no prohibitions set by the Israeli government for Jews to ascend the Temple Mount in the morning, although the afternoon hour was cut for the month of Ramadan. So this past Sunday morning, Jewish worshippers were on the Mount, and as they were walking by the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is in the southwestern corner of the Mount, someone threw a rock from the mosque at the worshippers.
From inside the mosque?
From inside the mosque, yes. And unlike, in fact, the first time that I can recall, the police reaction was not to immediately rush the Jews off the Mount and shut the Mount for Jews.
And close the Mount to Jews the rest of the day.
No, the Jews continued on their way. Someone was injured lightly in their leg, and the police shut the Mount for Muslims, and then pursued the perpetrators and arrested them. Now, what made this different? I just told what made this different from all other rock throwing and other incidents.
Completely unprecedented, by the way.
It's completely unprecedented.
Never happened before.
Until this time, the supposed reason, logic for rushing the Jews off the mountain, closing the Mount to Jews, was that this way you'll remove the thing that's so upsetting the Muslims from in front of their faces, and calm the situation. And God forbid you should shut the Mount to Muslims, because then you are going to create World War III, because immediately the Muslim world will rise up and say, what have you done? And this is it. This is war. And for the rights of a couple of lousy Jews to walk on the Temple Mount, it's certainly not worth it. Shut the Mount to Jews and allow the Muslims to continue to throw rocks and have their temper tantrums. Well, it didn't happen this time, and guess what? There were no riots. I didn't hear a protest.
And there was no war.
There was no war.
And the world didn't come to an end.
And the people were arrested, and the Jews continued on the Mount that morning and the next morning and the next morning, and there hasn't been another stone-throwing incident since. So guess what? This cult of Tammuz, this cult of helplessness and of self-serving tragedy can be ended in a second by any of many, many simple decisions. And this was a very commendable decision.
This is such a departure. And if it's the minister Erdan that we have to thank in conjunction with, or the new police chief of Jerusalem, I don't know, or the new mafkal, the new superintendent of police. But the point is, it's a new chapter. I mean, for 50 years of Jewish, the trampling of Jewish rights on the Temple Mount, and all of the travail that we've been through personally and that we've reported on for decades now on what's going on in the Temple Mount. This is the first time that the police actually indicated that the Jews need to be protected on the Temple Mount.
And that Israel has sovereignty on the Mount. And,
yes, that Israel has sovereignty.
And Chicken Little, the sky didn't fall.
See, what this all comes from, in my opinion, also with this whole cycle, is the fact that, I mean, again, this is the time to speak about it because it's 50 years now, the Jubilee of Jerusalem, the Jubilee of the Six-Day War. What was the Six-Day War? Do you realize that it was nothing like the world had ever seen? Because first of all, it was preemptive. Second of all, it was fast. It was actually 132 hours, the whole war. It was 6 days. And we had one small army which actually defeated 5. And by the last day, Israel had captured territories, let's say liberated, please, 4 times its former size. And you know what? Since then, the world hasn't forgiven us.
Right.
And a lot of Jews have bought that merchandise, that mental occupation, and are having a hard time dealing with the fact that we actually won. And that's why I call it the occupation of the mind. You know, like, again, is Trump going to move the embassy? Isn't he going to move the embassy? Was his trip a success? Was it not? Is he going to put pressure on Israel to concede land for peace, just like everyone else? And all this, you know, again, it goes on and on. But I'll tell you one thing. Just the fact that he stood up and spoke against the Palestinian Authority making payments to the terrorists, and the fact that now there's actually an initiative in the government of Israel to deduct the terrorist payments from the tax revenue which Israel forks over to the Palestinian Authority every month. I mean, I don't know if people out there are aware of the fact that, and this is a figure that I'm reading now, and this is a fact, okay? In the past 4 years, the Palestinian Authority has paid out 4 billion shekel, which is the equivalent of $1.12 billion, to the families of terrorists who were killed while carrying out terror attacks against Jews. So, is that a partner for peace? Is that a party that wants to live with you in peace? A party that gives financial reward to those who killed the Jews? It's absolutely incredible. So too, another unprecedented hallmark that we can recount this week is the fact that Israel is further tightening the noose around the electricity, which is being granted to Hamas-governed Gaza,
who doesn't pay the bill. Actually, Israel's consenting to a request by
because
the PA,
Palestinian Authority has been stuck with the bill.
Right.
But it's Israel that has been just so sweetly and elegantly providing electricity for free to the terrorists for so many years.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe it's possible for us to free our minds of the mental slavery and the occupation, and to actually get out of the Shelach
and maybe discover
mentality.
that the world respects us for that, and that the world would love for us to be in our land and to build our holy temple, and to invite the world to worship God with us on the Temple Mount, if we would just say that we were going to do it, if we would just stand up for ourselves. I think the world is very frustrated with our lack of decisiveness.
One thing is clear is that this really is the generation that can fix all of these things, and that can stop the terrible trend of baseless slander and hate against the land of Israel.
And baseless sobbing.
and baseless sobbing.
Baseless
right?
feeling sorry for ourselves and throwing up our hands.
Just as the spies came back and the people sobbed for no reason that night, and that's what brought about Tisha B'Av, so too the sobbing of the month of Tammuz is just this kind of self-immolation, self-deprecation,
and self-fulfilling.
And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy of misery begetting misery. Because why? Because it's a comfort zone. For some people, unfortunately, and for a lot of Jews, the comfort zone is to be miserable and to be in mourning and to be sobbing. Well, I say it's quite enough of that. Yitzchak, you're on your own for the next couple of weeks in Temple Talk.
Yeah, Rabbi, just before we sign off, will you please announce your 2 speaking engagements again?
Wednesday, the 21st of June in Abilene, Texas. Sunday, the 25th of June, in South Plains Hebraic Center in Lubbock, Texas.
If you're anywhere on the globe and can get to those 2 locations on those 2 dates, I highly recommend it. You will not be disappointed. Rabbi, have a great trip. And we'll be waiting here for your return.
And let's fix the sin of the spies.
And thank you, everybody, for being with us here on Temple Talk. I'll be back again next week. Temple Talk.